I live in a small town tucked into the damp folds of Maine's inland coast. You probably wouldn't know it by name. It's the kind of place that doesn't appear on tourist maps, and if it does, it's only as a speck between more notable destinations. People here fish, work modest jobs, and die where they were born. Life is slow. The forest creeps in on all sides, thick with pine and fog, and the sea is never far, always sending its cold breath inland to soak into the bones. But more than anything else, it rains. It rains like the sky resents us, like the clouds hang over this town not as weather, but as punishment. The sun is a stranger here, shy and rare, and when it shows up, we all stop and stare, like we've forgotten what warmth feels like. I'd lived in my little 2-story house on Elm Ridge for about 4 years. It was nothing special. Peeling white paint, a leaning mailbox, and a yard that stayed soggy through most of the year, but it was home, quiet, predictable. I worked from home, lived alone, and liked it that way. There was comfort in knowing what to expect. The morning fog, the sleepy coffee shop, the same clerk at the hardware store who never made eye contact. But all of that changed on one particular night, during a storm so violent it seemed like the clouds had finally decided to drown us. It had been raining hard since late afternoon, the kind of rain that doesn't fall in drops but sheets, turning the world into a gray blur beyond the windows. The wind howled like it had a voice, rattling the storm windows and lifting shingles with greedy fingers. Thunder cracked every few minutes, sharp, vicious, close. The gutters were overflowing, water gushing over the sides and soaking the foundation. I could hear the low, choking gurgle of drains trying and failing to keep up with the downpour. Around 9, the power flickered, then died entirely. Just me, the dark, and the storm. I lit some candles and tried to read, but the sound of the water outside kept pulling my attention. Something was wrong. I could hear a deep sloshing sound coming from the street right outside the house. Curious, and admittedly a little nervous, I grabbed my heavy boots, shrugged into my raincoat, and took a flashlight from the kitchen drawer. The moment I stepped outside, the rain slapped me in the face like a scolding parent, cold and endless. I trudged down the short path to the street, where I saw water swirling in frantic eddies around the storm drain in front of my driveway. It was clogged, clearly. Leaves, sticks, and maybe even bits of trash had built up, and the water couldn't get through fast enough. I bent down and shone the flashlight into the metal grate. The beam cut through the mist and shadows, illuminating the swirling water below. At first, I saw nothing unusual, just rushing water, slick stone, a few floating pine needles. Then, I saw it. A face. It wasn't inches from the grate, but deep, maybe 3 or 4 feet down, half obscured by shadow, yet unmistakably human. It was pale. Deathly pale, like something preserved in ice. The skin looked rubbery, almost translucent, stretched tight across a bloated face. The eyes were wide open, blank, milky white like they had no pupils, no depth. And the mouth? God, the mouth was closed in a line so flat it didn't seem possible. Expressionless, unblinking, unmoving. It didn't thrash or make a sound. It just stared. I dropped the flashlight. My stomach turned, and a scream twisted in my throat as I scrambled backward, slipping on the wet asphalt. The flashlight tumbled into the water, its light swinging wildly as it landed, casting jagged shadows that made the face seem to stretch and crawl like something alive. Then, a flash of lightning lit up the street for one single blinding second. And in that moment of white clarity, I saw it again. It hadn't moved. It didn't need to. I ran back into the house without looking back, heart pounding like a drum inside my chest. I slammed the door shut, locked all 3 deadbolts, and collapsed onto the floor, trying to catch my breath. Every hair on my body was standing on end, and I could still feel the weight of those eyes staring at me, even behind walls. When I finally composed myself, I called the police. I didn't know what I expected them to do, but I had to report it. Had to tell someone. 2 officers came out about 15 minutes later. I was still soaked, shivering, wrapped in a blanket. I led them outside with one of their flashlights. Of course, the drain was empty. No face, no body, nothing but cold water, slowly beginning to recede as the rain let up. They humored me, opened the grate, even lowered a small inspection camera they had in the cruiser. Nothing, just concrete, debris, and runoff. They suggested maybe it was an animal, or stress, or a trick of the storm. "Happens more than you'd think," one of them said. "Storms can mess with your head." But it wasn't in my head. I knew what I saw. That blank, swollen face had burned itself into my brain. Even now, I can still see it every time I close my eyes. In the days that followed, I tried to return to normal life. I cleaned out the drain myself just to be safe, bought a new flashlight, laughed it off with the clerk at the coffee shop, pretending it had been a raccoon or maybe a prank, but something inside me had shifted. A new kind of fear took root in my chest, one that didn't go away with daylight. It just slept, waiting. Then came the scratch. It was barely noticeable at first, just a soft, intermittent sound, like fingernails brushing against wood. I thought it was mice under the floorboards, or maybe squirrels in the attic, but it only happened when it rained. That was the first clue. It came with the storms, always, and as the weeks passed, the sound grew louder, bolder. I started to hear it in the walls, behind the sinks, beneath the tub, crawling, dragging, wet. I called exterminators. Nothing. I ripped out a piece of drywall in the bathroom myself, dry, clean, empty. No nests, no rodents, nothing but quiet pipes and darkness. And still, the scratching continued. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I moved, packed everything I owned into a rented van and drove across town, rented a third-floor apartment in an old brick building downtown. I told myself I was free, that I'd escaped whatever it was. But the next storm found me, and so did the sound. Same scratching, same dragging, sloshing thump from inside the walls. I moved again, this time to a cottage on the outskirts of town, surrounded by woods. I lasted 2 weeks before the next thunderstorm, and when it came, I heard it again. Louder this time, like whatever it was had followed the rain and found me quicker. That was when the truth finally dawned on me. Not as a sudden revelation, but as a slow, suffocating realization. It wasn't the house, it wasn't the town, it wasn't even me. It was the storm. Wherever the rain went, it went too. Like it was riding the weather, carried through the sewers and drains, slithering through pipes and puddles, into basements and beneath floorboards. It was in the water of the water. A presence. A watcher. A thing that waits in the spaces between the drops. Now, years later, I still live in Maine. I've tried to leave, but something always brings me back. Maybe it's financial, maybe it's guilt, or maybe deep down I know that running won't matter. The rain is everywhere. It always finds me. I check the forecast obsessively now. I avoid drains. I keep the taps turned tight, the bathtubs dry, the basement door locked. I sleep with earplugs in, but even through them, I sometimes hear the faint sound of water dripping from places it shouldn't. And sometimes, when the storm is especially bad, I hear it again. Scratching, dragging, breathing. Sometimes I catch a glimpse of something in the mirror, just behind me, gone when I turn. And sometimes, if I'm stupid enough to peer into a drain, or if I let the water pool too long, I see it. His face. Waiting. Watching. I don't know what he wants. I don't know if he's hunting or haunting. All I know is this. He was never truly in that drain. He was in the storm all along. I can still remember the storm like it was yesterday. My daughter was only 6 months old when it hit. One of those wild, unpredictable storms that seems to roll in from nowhere and take over everything. The rain came down in sheets, the wind howling through the trees like it was angry about something. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out altogether. I wasn't too worried. Our power goes out from time to time with storms like this. It's the price we pay for living in the middle of nowhere. The generator kicked on, though, and the house stayed lit, humming with the soft glow of emergency lights. I just finished putting my daughter to bed, tucking her in as she gurgled sleepily in her crib, content and warm. I settled into the living room with my cup of tea, trying to relax while the storm raged outside. The baby monitor was on, just like always. It was a small comfort, knowing I could keep an eye on her even from across the house. At first, there was nothing. Just the usual quiet hiss of static as it adjusted to the storm outside. But then, as I watched the screen, something caught my eye. A slight, rhythmic movement. My daughter's crib, gently shaking. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, like a breeze had caught the fabric of her blanket. But the motion was too deliberate, too controlled. My heart skipped a beat. I stared at the monitor, trying to make sense of it. My daughter was still asleep, nestled under the blanket, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. So, why was the crib moving? I leaned closer to the screen, my hand hovering over the monitor, ready to adjust it if it was just interference from the storm. But as I did, that's when I saw it. Behind the crib, a shadow. Not a figure, not a person, but something dark and formless, like a smudge of darkness in the room that didn't belong there. It was moving, slowly, like it was circling the crib, shifting between the shadowed corners of the room, but always remaining just outside the range of the camera. The monitor flickered, and for a moment I thought the screen was malfunctioning, but then it came back into focus, and the shadow was still there, creeping closer. I froze, my body going stiff with fear. What was I seeing? Was it my imagination? Was the storm messing with my mind? But no, I could see it. I could feel it. Something was there. It wasn't just the static on the monitor. It was something else, something alive. And then, the screen went completely black. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the dark screen, my mind racing. Every worst-case scenario flashed in my head all at once. I dropped the teacup and ran to my daughter's room, panic flooding my chest. The storm outside raged louder, the wind whipping against the house. I flung the door open without thinking, desperate to reach her. The room was silent. My daughter was still asleep in her crib, her tiny chest rising and falling with slow, peaceful breaths. There was nothing to explain the shaking crib, nothing to justify the shadow I'd seen behind it. The room was still. It was calm. But my eyes quickly shifted to the window. It was open. The curtains were swaying in the wind, blowing inward like someone had just passed through them. Rainwater had soaked into the carpet, dark patches spreading in the stillness of the room. My breath caught in my throat. How had the window gotten open? We never left it that way. The house was sealed tight. How had the rain gotten in like this? I stepped closer to my daughter's crib, my hands trembling as I reached for her. She was fine. There was no sign of anything unusual, no trace of a figure, no evidence of whatever I'd seen. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been here, that it had been watching her, circling, waiting. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor, leaning with my back against the door, my eyes never leaving the crib. The storm continued its angry rage outside, but inside everything was still, silent. The next morning, when the storm had passed, I tried to convince myself that I had imagined it. A trick of the storm, the lights, the shadows. Maybe it was stress or lack of sleep. Maybe it was just paranoia. But as the days went on, I noticed something strange. The baby monitor never worked the same again. Sometimes, for no reason, it would turn on by itself during storms. I'd hear that familiar hiss of static filling the air, and when I looked at the screen, there was always something there. Always the same image of the crib, the same static-filled, flickering picture. Even though my daughter was now 10, even though we'd sold the crib years ago, the monitor would still show the empty crib in the same way it had when she was a baby. The static, the shadow. It was always there, lurking, waiting. Sometimes I'd stand in the hallway at night, my heart thudding in my chest, staring at the empty crib on the screen, unable to look away. My daughter would be in her own room, asleep, safe, but the static would flicker, and I couldn't help but feel that sense of unease, that feeling of something or someone watching. We moved again a few years later to a bigger house, one that had no remnants of that nursery, no trace of the crib or the monitor. I thought maybe a change of scenery would help, that it would put it all behind us, but there were nights when the rain would fall and the winds would howl outside, when I'd wake in the middle of the night with the faintest sensation of something watching me. And I'd hear it. Static, crackling, faint but unmistakable. That empty crib, forever caught in the storm. Sometimes, I'll catch myself staring at the monitor, as if expecting to see the shadow again. But now, my daughter's grown, and I realize the true horror. No matter how many years pass, no matter how far we move, the storm never stops following us. It was well past midnight, and the storm outside was far from letting up. The rain hammered down with such ferocity that it felt like the very heavens were trying to wash the earth clean. My windshield wipers struggled to keep up, swiping at the deluge, but the water kept accumulating faster than they could clear it away. I was driving home from a late shift at work, exhausted, my body heavy with the weight of long hours and little sleep. All I wanted was to get home, crawl into bed, and forget about the day. The road was empty, save for the occasional distant flash of lightning that lit up the sky for a split second, revealing a landscape twisted and strange in the brief moment of brightness. The storm seemed endless, its intensity pressing down on me as I drove. The familiar stretch of highway was nearly deserted, with only the occasional truck speeding past in the opposite direction. The rain beat against my car in rhythmic waves, and I felt like I was driving through some kind of foggy nightmare. Then, through the sheets of rain, I saw her. At first, it was just a blur, a figure standing on the side of the road just beyond the last gas station before the interstate. She was soaked, her body seemingly swallowed by the rain, her clothes sticking to her skin as if the storm itself had become part of her. My headlights illuminated her for a split second, and I could see she was barefoot, her feet bare and exposed to the elements. She was wearing a white dress, long and flowing, clinging to her in the downpour. She stood there, motionless, her eyes directed down the road, as if waiting for something. Or someone. A shiver ran down my spine. It was the dead of night, the storm was unrelenting, and there was no other soul in sight. But something about her, something about the way she stood there in the middle of nowhere, made me pull over. I don't usually pick up strangers, especially not on a night like this. The world was too strange, too unpredictable, but there was something about her that felt urgent, desperate. I slowed the car, my tires skimming through puddles that reflected the flashing streetlights in eerie patterns. I turned on the hazards, signaling that I was stopping. As I did, she slowly turned her head, her eyes meeting mine through the rain-streaked glass. I opened the door, hesitating only for a moment before I turned off the engine. She didn't say a word as she walked toward the car, her bare feet barely making a sound against the wet road. She opened the passenger door without a word and climbed in. She didn't seem bothered by the wet seat or the dampness. She just sat there, silent, dripping water onto the upholstery. The sound of the rain seemed to fill the air around us as the car stood still in the middle of the road. The only thing I could hear was the faint hiss of static coming from the radio and the constant patter of rain hitting the roof. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible over the storm, almost drowned out by the noise, but there was a certain softness to it, a fragility that struck me immediately. I nodded, trying to offer some kind of comfort, though I wasn't sure why. She didn't offer any further explanation, just sat there with her eyes fixed ahead, her hands folded in her lap, as if waiting for something. I turned the engine back on, and we continued down the road, the rain pouring down harder than ever. The streets were slick, the wind howling in the distance. I tried to make conversation, asking her where she was headed, but she only pointed down the road, her finger extending slowly as if it had taken every bit of effort to do so. Her response was so strange, so detached, that I didn't press her any further. It felt as if there was something unsaid, something hidden behind those glassy eyes, but I couldn't place it. A few miles later, as I passed the turnoff for the interstate, I glanced over at her again. The rain was still relentless, but the road ahead was clearer. And that's when it hit me. The seat was empty, gone. The seat beside me was soaked, the water from her soaked clothes leaving a dark patch on the seat cushion. But she was no longer there. The door hadn't opened, and the locks were still engaged. The sudden emptiness in the car felt like a vacuum, like I had been ripped out of reality for a moment and thrust back into something much darker. My mind raced as I slammed on the brakes in the middle of the road, the tires screeching in protest as I stopped the car abruptly. I sat there, the car idling in the middle of the street, the rain still pounding down around me. I turned my head, desperately scanning the car for any sign of her. Nothing. There was nothing. The seat was soaked, the door was still locked, and the only sound was the storm outside. No footsteps, no movement, no sign that she had ever been there at all. I sat frozen, my heart racing in my chest. How could she have disappeared so suddenly? How could she have vanished without a trace? The more I thought about it, the more the situation seemed impossible. I had driven several miles with her sitting beside me, and now she was gone. It didn't make sense. The air in the car felt thick, like I was suffocating under the weight of something unexplainable. I drove the rest of the way home in a daze, unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. When I pulled into my driveway, I just sat there for a while, staring at the steering wheel, trying to calm my breathing, but I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her. The soaked woman in the white dress, her face pale, her eyes wide and empty. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I tried to close my eyes, her face haunted me, the soft whisper of "thank you" echoing in my mind. But the question remained, who was she? What was she? And why had she been there with me only to vanish without a trace? Weeks later, I found myself still unable to let go of the strange encounter. My mind kept returning to it over and over again, like a song on repeat that I couldn't escape. I didn't tell anyone about the woman in the white dress. I wasn't sure how to explain it to anyone, and I was afraid they'd think I was crazy. But something kept pulling me back, making me search for answers. It wasn't just a passing thought, it was an obsession. I had to know. One evening, as I was doing some random internet searches about strange occurrences on that stretch of road, I came across an old article from a local newspaper. It was archived and buried beneath dozens of other forgotten stories. But as soon as I saw the headline, my blood ran cold. Teenage girl killed in accident on County Road 7 during storm. I clicked on the link, my fingers trembling. The article described a girl, just 17 years old, who had died in a tragic accident on that very stretch of road, exactly where I had picked up the woman in the white dress. She had been walking home from her prom, her dress soaked by the rain, when a car had lost control on the wet road and struck her. The impact had been fatal. The details of the accident were heartbreaking. She had been trying to make it home, desperately trying to get back to her family, but she never made it, and she had been wearing a white dress. A chill ran down my spine as I read the words. It was her, the woman in the car, the one who had thanked me and then disappeared without a trace. It couldn't have been anyone else. The details matched too perfectly. The soaked dress, the haunting eyes, the way she had silently pointed down the road, it was all there. She had been the girl who had died on that road years ago, and somehow she had returned, lost in time, trapped in the storm, forever seeking something that she could never reach. I don't know why she chose me or why I saw her that night. Maybe I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, or maybe there's something deeper, something that I can't understand. All I know is that when I drive that road now, especially on stormy nights, I can feel her presence, and every time I glance over at the empty passenger seat, I wonder if she'll be there again. Soaked, barefoot, wearing that same white dress, still waiting for someone to take her home.